Imagine a young man disappearing without a trace, vanishing into the forests of a quiet town, only to be found years later in a place so ordinary, so overlooked, that no one could have suspected it. A body, hidden in plain sight, mere blocks from his home, twisted into a position that defies explanation. For 7 years, Joshua Maddux was missing, and the truth of what happened to him remains one of the most chilling mysteries in Colorado history. In May of 2008, 18-year-old Joshua Maddux left his home in Woodland Park, Colorado, as he had done countless times before. He told his sister he was going for a walk, nothing more than a casual stroll through the woods or a trek along one of the trails near his home. Joshua was a free spirit, a young man who had always been drawn to nature and solitude. He had long hair, played guitar, wrote in his journals, and spent much of his free time exploring the natural beauty around the small town of 7,500 residents, nestled on the edge of the Pike National Forest. At first, his family did not worry. Joshua had a carefree, independent nature. He was a bright student, well-liked by peers, and had no history of troubling behavior. His mother and father were divorced, and Joshua lived with his father, Mike, and 2 sisters, Kate and Ruth. The day he disappeared seemed like any other. He said goodbye to Kate, telling her he was stepping out for a walk, and that was the last time anyone saw him alive. Hours passed, and Joshua did not return. At first, it was unsettling but not alarming. Perhaps he had wandered further than usual, or perhaps he had decided to spend the night elsewhere, following the kind of impulsive decisions typical of a young man on the brink of adulthood. But as the hours stretched into days, the worry began to gnaw at his family. By the 5th day, with no word from Joshua, his father contacted the local police. A search began, sweeping the neighborhoods, the surrounding trails, the forested areas, and abandoned cabins. The search was thorough and extensive. Teams of volunteers, local authorities, and even members of the community scoured the area for any trace of Joshua. Drones were not widely available at the time, so it was slow, methodical work. They followed every lead, checked every possible hiding place, and questioned anyone who might have had contact with Joshua. Yet, week after week, month after month, there was no sign of him. The town was gripped by unease. How could a young man vanish in a place so small, so familiar? Joshua's disappearance had other shadows hanging over it. 2 years prior, he had suffered the traumatic loss of his older brother, Zachary, who had died by suicide just a week before his high school graduation. It was a devastating blow to Joshua, and while he seemed to recover in the years that followed, the grief had undoubtedly shaped him. Friends and family noted that he had been doing well leading up to May of 2008, happy and engaged in his hobbies, not showing signs of depression or self-harm. There was no reason to suspect that he would disappear willingly or fall into danger. Yet Joshua vanished. And for 7 years there was nothing. His family held on to hope, imagining that perhaps he had left to start a new life. Maybe he was traveling, playing music, writing, or simply escaping into the woods, living a life that only he understood. But as the years passed, the hope became a fragile thread, and the reality that Joshua might never be found began to settle in. Then, in 2015, just under a mile from Joshua's family home, a man named Chuck Murphy began the demolition of an old wood cabin on a large plot of land. The cabin had not been used for years, having fallen into decay. It was surrounded by towering pines and obscured from view, offset 50 feet from the roadside. Inside, the smell of rotten damp permeated the air. Wildlife had made its home within the structure, and the interior was dark, oppressive, and uninviting. Chuck had originally purchased the cabin decades earlier, in the 1950s. In its history, it had been part of Thunderhead Ranch, a site known for illicit activity, including drinking, gambling, and rumors of prostitution, run by a man named Big Bert Bergstrom. Over the years, the cabin had passed into relative obscurity, eventually being used as storage by Chuck's brother. By the time Chuck arrived to demolish it, the building had long been abandoned. As the crew dismantled the chimney, their tools hitting the brickwork, they encountered something that would shock the community to its core. Inside the narrow brick structure, there was a body, compressed and contorted, twisted into a fetal position with legs. The remains were mummified, preserved in the chimney for 7 long years. The body was positively identified through dental records as Joshua Maddux. The discovery was beyond comprehension. How could Joshua, missing for so many years, have ended up in a chimney barely more than a mile from the house where he grew up? How had this structure gone unnoticed during all the searches, the community patrols, and the frantic efforts to locate him? Questions mounted. The coroner's investigation found no evidence of drugs, alcohol, or trauma. There were no broken bones, no knife wounds, no bullet holes. The official ruling initially pointed to accidental death, suggesting that Joshua had somehow climbed down the chimney and become trapped, ultimately succumbing to the freezing temperatures. At the time of his disappearance, temperatures had dropped as low as -6°C, and hypothermia was considered the most plausible explanation. Yet, the circumstances surrounding Joshua's death made this explanation troubling. Chuck Murphy, the cabin's owner, insisted that the chimney had been constructed with a steel mesh or grate to prevent animals from entering. The mesh was firmly affixed to the inside of the chimney and would have made it virtually impossible for anyone to climb down it voluntarily. How then could Joshua have entered it himself? Other anomalies compounded the mystery. Inside the cabin, a large wooden breakfast bar had been moved to block the fireplace. Joshua's clothes were folded neatly nearby, while he was found wearing only a thin thermal shirt. His body was positioned head first into the chimney, a contortion that seemed almost impossible. These details suggested that something about the official story didn't add up. The accidental death explanation became harder to believe. The coroner's ruling of accidental death was made official, yet doubts remained. The steel mesh, the positioning of Joshua's body, the folded clothes, and the obstructing breakfast bar all contradicted the theory that he had entered the chimney on his own. Had he been placed there deliberately? Was there foul play? These questions lingered unanswered, leaving the story shrouded in uncertainty. Years later, a Reddit post reignited the mystery. The post claimed that Joshua had been seen shortly before his disappearance with a man named Andrew Newman, or Andy, had a violent history, including involvement in multiple stabbings in New Mexico. The post suggested that Joshua's death could have been connected to Andy, a theory that authorities never fully investigated. According to the poster, there were rumors that Andy had boasted about putting Joshua in a hole, yet no formal questioning or investigation was undertaken. Andrew Newman had indeed existed. Like Joshua, he was a music lover, played in a band, and had led a free-spirited lifestyle. The parallels between their interests made it plausible that the two had known each other. The Reddit post pointed out the glaring inconsistencies in the official narrative: the steel mesh in the chimney, the impossibility of Joshua entering head first, the breakfast bar, and the folded clothes. These details suggested that the coroner's conclusion of accidental death did not tell the whole story. Even the physical logistics of the scene raised questions. Joshua's legs were above his head, body twisted in a fetal position, found without shoes and only wearing a thin thermal shirt. The cabin had been abandoned for years, yet his clothes were neatly folded next to the fireplace. If he had entered voluntarily, he would have needed to remove his clothing, navigate the obstruction, and somehow position himself in a space that seemed almost physically impossible to access. Each new detail deepened the mystery. Despite the anomalies, the official explanation stands. Joshua Maddux's death is classified as accidental, caused by hypothermia after becoming trapped in a chimney near his family home. Yet the unanswered questions remain, haunting the story. Why was a potentially dangerous individual like Andrew Newman never questioned? Why was a body found in such an impossible location, only blocks from home, after 7 years of searches? Why did the official explanation fail to account for the numerous inconsistencies discovered at the scene? The case of Joshua Maddux continues to perplex and disturb. A young man vanished, only to be found years later in a location so close, yet so overlooked. With circumstances that seem impossible, his story leaves us with chilling questions about what really happened and whether the truth will ever be known. Joshua's disappearance and discovery remind us that sometimes the most disturbing mysteries occur not in distant, exotic locations, but in the familiar, the places we take for granted. A boy who loved nature and music, who once walked freely through the forests of Woodland Park, ended up hidden in a chimney, his life cut tragically short in a place everyone assumed was empty and harmless. As we reflect on his story, the unease lingers. The unanswered questions, The contradictions and the shadow of possible foul play leave a dark imprint. Joshua Maddux's story is a cautionary tale about the fragility of life, the limits of our understanding, and the mysteries that can exist right in our own backyard. Even today, the official records remain unchanged. The coroner's conclusion of accidental death stands, but the doubts, the discrepancies, and the unanswered questions continue to stir debate. Was it truly an accident, or was there something far darker at play? As we recount this story, it serves as a chilling reminder. Sometimes the most horrifying events are not distant legends or fictional tales. Sometimes they are real, they are close, and they remain hidden in plain sight for years, leaving us to wonder what really happened. Joshua Maddux vanished, only to be found where no one expected him. And the questions surrounding his death may never be fully answered, leaving us with a story that is, in every sense, darker than fiction. Thank you for listening. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. And as you lay down tonight, remember that some mysteries, even when seemingly solved, never truly leave us. Sleep tight.